Welcome to session 8, everyone.
Welcome.
We're back.
We are back for the 8th session. Today is Valentine's Day.
Or Palentine's Day. We're pals.
That's right. So, yeah. Moving right along, we have been, for the most part, recording one session every week. But it requires a lot of effort behind the scenes to make each one happen. First of all, we have to select the material, so I have to go through the actual letters, put them into a format that I can work with in Word, and then get out my chainsaw and my hatchet and start cutting. And then I also have to do a serious amount of editing because, as I mentioned before, these are written in an old style of English from not even the late 1800s. The English that K.H. speaks is even a little bit earlier than that. So he uses it for a few sayings and word sentence constructs that are different from even the conversational English that was used at the time. And that's a major reason why these are so difficult to read in their original form. So I actually change the word order sometimes. I add commas, I delete commas. I will switch out a more modern word for an older word that would probably not be comprehensible to our viewers. So I try to make it listener friendly.
What percentage would you say has been removed from our extracts?
Well,
from the original, rather, to arrive at the extracts?
Anywhere between 50 and 70% of it
is removed.
Yes.
So what we're seeing here is 50 to 25 to 50% of
right.
the original letter.
Yes, and a lot of it is repetition. He will say the same thing in a couple of different ways, or even 3 times sometimes. And K.H. is quite wordy. He likes the English language, and he's very competent in using it. So he often says more than he needs to, so I have to condense out the essential part of what he is saying. And that will make it much more easy for our listeners to listen to it. So we're on lesson 11. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to point out is the amount of editing that Paul has to do. He spends hours listening, watching these, editing out mistakes that we make, etc., etc. And
we both do. You watch them, and I do.
It requires a lot of time. So if once in a while we miss a session, that could be the problem. And plus, Paul is very busy. So, letter number 11. This is from theosophy.wiki. It's an actual photograph of the first page of this letter that we are going to be covering today. We started it 2 weeks ago, and we will continue with that today. But that gives you a sample of what these letters look like. K.H.'s writing is meticulous. It's all handwritten, obviously.
Where's this physical letter?
In London, in the British Library.
One of our viewers asked a question about that. Is there physical evidence of these letters? And I said, yes, there are at least 2, if I'm not mistaken.
No, all of them.
All
of the letters are in the British Library.
All of these
all
letters.
All of them. And in fact,
well, several weren't kept, are archived by Sinnett. They were just randomly around his house, isn't that right?
No, he had a box.
Okay.
And he would pull them out and he would read different ones. He would show them to other people. They would read them. The pages would get separated. They weren't dated and numbered. And it was a mess. They were just haphazardly in this box when he died, and it has taken decades to sort them all out.
But all the letters that Sinnett received are on site.
And unless there are a few that are missing, which we would never know. But he was pretty meticulous. He was a newspaper editor. So it's pretty safe to say that he kept all of his letters. Hume, on the other hand, no one knows what happened to his letters.
You mentioned that they're not on display, but they will show them to you if you ask.
Yes, I believe you can still do it. It used to be that you could make arrangements ahead of time. Someone would meet you at the library in their archives room, or special collections room, and would show you a few sample letters. You have to wear white gloves. You can't touch them physically. But yes, cool. As far as I know, you can still arrange to do that. So in this letter, it was written to A.O. Hume, not to Sinnett, but Mahatma K.H. sent it to Sinnett to read first, to review before sending it on to Hume. And if you remember from our previous session, they were talking about the School of Magic. K.H. was saying that Sinnett and Hume were hoping for a school of magic where they can learn all of these tricks that the adepts can do, all of these powers. And so he's trying to convince them that that's a very bad idea. So he talks about a school of magic which 20 years prior, several prominent magicians or people who studied magic had tried to get going in London. And he said, I looked in on it several times to see if there was any chance that it would succeed. And he said, basically, that there was no chance because they were only interested in magic, and what was missing?
The brotherhood concept.
The idea that it had to be practical, that it had to be to make humanity more spiritual in nature. And that was completely missing. So he said, I knew they had no chance of succeeding, and it didn't. If
it's only for personal excitement and not for all of humanity, nothing has tremendous power.
Exactly.
It would have the power of the universe behind it if it was aimed at helping everyone.
And that changes everything. So some of the people who participated in this club of magic, Eliphas Levi was one that he mentioned, because he was an esotericist, a French esotericist, a poet, a writer, and a ceremonial magician. K.H. actually had a certain amount of respect for him because he did care about people. And he did have some good ideas. We're going to hear his name a couple of more times as we go along in these letters. He wrote several different books, more than 20 of them. The second person who was part of this group was Antonio Regazzoni. And we don't know much about him except that he was a mesmerist. And as we pointed out last time, I had Paul read a section on mesmerism that H.P.B. wrote, and it describes how it's your personal energy that you are using to affect another person, usually for purposes of healing. So Reiki, therapeutic touch, these are methods of using a type of mesmerism, which is very different from hypnotism. And I mentioned that Alcott, during several months in 1882 and 1883, discovered that he had a tremendous capacity for doing this, and he had some amazing cures. And he learned a lot about it. But eventually his own master, Mahatma Maurya, told him, okay, you need to stop because it's depleting your energy too much. So from now on, you're done with that. Mm-hmm. The other one was that he's going to mention, well, we'll bring that up when that point comes.
Sure.
Oh, by the way, the other one was the Copt, Zerg van Bay.
Oh.
And I was wrong. Ethiopia has nothing to do with the Coptic Christians. They are entirely, as far as I can tell, in Egypt. Mm-hmm. Luxor is one of the centers of where the Copts operate, or where there's a group, or where there was a group of them. They are an interesting group. The masters pay quite a bit of attention to them. And in fact, as I pointed out, the early letters before this period that Olcott was receiving was from the group in Luxor. So it's very possible that some of those were associated with the Copt religion.
That's an exoteric organization, right?
It's exoteric, but there's an esoteric part of it.
Is it considered a religion? Coptic? What is Coptic?
It's called, I guess, called Coptic Christianity.
Okay.
It's a Christian group in Egypt. So let's continue where we left off last time.
All right.
And I'll let Paul take it up from here.
How far are we through letter? We're kind of in the middle of letter, first third maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Nor did we begin the correspondence upon this subject. It was Mr. Sinnett who addressed to a, quote, brother, 2 long letters even before Madame Blavatsky had obtained permission from any of us to answer him. Her own chief, Maurya, having refused point blank, it was to me that she applied. I consented, even telling her she might give you my Tibetan mystic name, and I answered our friend's letter. Then came yours, as unexpectedly. Your first letter was so sincere, its spirit so promising that, if I did not shout Eureka after reading it, it was only because I knew human and Western nature too well. I carried it to our venerable chief, the Mahachohan. All I could obtain from him was the permission to temporarily correspond and let you speak your whole mind before giving any definite promise. Interesting permission with caveats there. We are not gods, and even they, our chiefs, they hope. Human nature is incomprehensible, and yours is perhaps more intensely so than that of any other man I know. I, who had never had the privilege of your personal acquaintance as Madame Blavatsky had, knew you far better than she did. I had positively predicted your letter to her. Rather than having no society at all, she was willing to have it on any terms at first, and then take her chances afterwards. I had warned her that you were not a man to submit to any conditions but your own, or even to take one step toward the foundation of an organization unless you first received such proofs as we generally give only to those who, by trial of years, have proved themselves thoroughly trustworthy.
Let's take a look at that.
Sure.
So, as we pointed out several times, he's making the Mahatmas, and their chiefs are making an enormous exception to the rules. They're going out of bounds to try to accommodate these 2 European men who have proposed the object of setting up a society that was composed where they would be in charge of the group and they would receive training. Now, for some time, they had been remember HPB, it took them 100 years before they found someone who was capable of doing what she did, who was the proper conduit between the ancient wisdom teachings of the brotherhood and the outer world. And it would take a very special person to be able to do that. She had the capability, and she had done it for a number of years, but her energy was depleted. It was draining her life force. And they were very much looking for a replacement. They tried one person after another. They were hoping that one of these men, and they kind of focused on Sinnett, would be the one that they might be able to work with. They might be able to do a workaround somehow, because he didn't have the clairvoyance and the psychic abilities that HPB had.
Did he have some?
We'll find. I don't think he did, not to any great extent. We'll find out a little bit more about that as we go.
I've said this many times. It's so remarkable that two men, as prominent as they were able to apply to wise fourth, fifth degree initiates and request, hey, let's chat. You want to chat for a couple of years? Wouldn't it be nice if we could apply now and do this and request the same kind of correspondence?
It won't happen. No, they tried it. This was an experiment.
Yeah.
In many ways, it failed.
Yeah.
But it provided tremendous experience, both for them and for us in the outer world. So it's not likely to be repeated in our lifetime, but it probably will at some point.
I wonder if KH or Moria had the foresight, they could have if they wanted to, I'm sure, to predict that these letters would have some reach in the future, would have some lasting legacy, the letters themselves, in
not
the
necessarily,
exoteric.
Because
they're extremely valuable.
They
for
are.
those who can seek them out.
But remember, they were never intended to be published.
I know, but I wonder if there was some intention there. Yeah. It's interesting to think about.
We'll never know.
Shall we continue?
Yes.
Okay. She rebelled against the notion and assured me that if I would give you one unimpeachable test of occult powers, you would be satisfied, whereas Mr. Sinnett never would. And now that both of you have had such proofs, what are the results? While Mr. Sinnett believes, you have allowed your mind to become gradually filled with odious doubts and most insulting suspicions. If you will kindly remember my first short note from Jhelum, you will see to what I was referring in saying that you would find your mind poisoned. You misunderstood me then as you have ever since, for in it I did not refer to Colonel Alcott's letter in the Bombay Gazette, but to your own state of mind. Was I wrong? You not only doubt the brooch phenomenon, you positively disbelieve it. You say to Madame Blavatsky that she may be one of those who believe that good ends are justified by bad means, and you assure her of your unalterable friendship. Even your letter to me is full of the same suspicious spirit. You may perhaps allow me to give you the ideas of a humble apostle of truth, an obscure Hindu upon that point. As man is a creature born with a free will and endowed with reason, whence spring all his notions of right and wrong, he does not per se represent any definite moral ideal. The conception of morality in general relates first of all to the motive, and only then to the means or modes of action. If we would never call a man moral who, following the rule of a famous religious schemer, uses bad means for a good object, how much less would we call him moral who uses seemingly good and noble means to achieve a decidedly wicked or contemptible object? What a conundrum. I can't wait to talk about this. Mm-hmm. According to your logic, Madame Blavatsky would have to be placed in the first of these categories, and I in the second. For, while giving to her, to a certain extent, the benefit of the doubt, with myself you use no such precautions, and you accuse me of setting up a system of deceit. You add the following crushing and direct accusation. Wow. Quote, you do not want this branch to succeed. You merely want it as a lure to your native brethren. You know it will be a sham but it will look sufficiently like the real thing, end quote. This is a direct quote. I am shown guilty of the pursuit of a wicked, mean objective through low and contemptible means, for example, false pretenses.
So,
Wow.
A lot to unpack in this section here. First of all, he says that Mr. Sinnett seems to have grasped all that they intended and to be willing to go along with it, and Mr. Hume has not. He wants to argue rather than to be taught anything. So then he refers to the brooch incident, and remember there are two, so he's talking about the one that occurred at his own home. Remember the one where the brooch was brought out in the garden in a star-shaped flower bed? Well, for whatever reason, Hume started disbelieving that and thinking that it was fake. So he wasn't operating in good faith. He was operating under suspicion already. And then he accuses KH of impure motives. And KH uses his own logic to prove to him that he's not being accurate or fair. KH is very good with logic. He's a teacher. He knows how to explain things very well. So Hume accused him straight out. You really don't want this branch to succeed, do you? You just want it to fool people into thinking that you care about humanity. It's pretty astounding that he took that tone of voice, but he did. He said, this is a direct quote. You only want it as a lure to your native brethren. You know it will be a sham, but it will look sufficiently like the real thing. All right, so they now know pretty much who Hume is, and yet they have to be very careful. We'll find out later that they will say straight out that if he becomes an enemy, he will be an indefatigable one.
Indefatigable.
He will write out his pen dry in denouncing us. So they knew that they had to treat him with kid gloves, although they weren't going to kowtow to him either. They weren't going to bow to him. They were going to show him where he was wrong.
They're taking a risk, but they know what's right.
They knew that if they could get him in their camp and get him on their side, that he would be a powerful agent on their behalf.
Let's make a point of clarification. The branch that Hume is talking about, where he's accusing KH of, is this the hypothetical new branch that
Yes.
they are requesting to launch?
Right.
Okay,
the
so it hasn't been
Anglo-Indian branch.
But it's not even in existence.
Yeah, they've been talking about it for a couple of months actually, but it's going to take a long time to get it up and running.
So at this point, it's not actually in existence yet. Okay.
Go ahead.
I think we should mention the two different approaches to
Yes,
morals.
Yes, absolutely. So go ahead and...
Sure. The concept of do the means justify the end?
Yes.
And this is a topic that Terry and I, it's woven through all of our teachings. Theosophy, and HPB did say that theosophy is ethics in action.
Yes.
It is ethics in action.
Exactly.
So the question that we are asking ourselves, do the means justify the end? And also, does the end justify the means? Both. We're being presented with both. So I love how he says it here. If we would never call a man moral who, following the rule of a famous religious schemer, uses bad means for a good object, how much less would we call him moral who uses seemingly good and noble means to achieve a decidedly wicked or contemptible object?
straight out. Neither one is acceptable.
No, of course not. That's, yeah.
And he said, you're accusing HPB of one of those possible scenarios and me of the other one.
Now, if we were interested in skirting the line or gray magic, which we're not at all, a positive means, I'm sorry, a positive end arrived at by questionable means. I mean, some people really do believe that's okay because, hey, I'm helping the world, but how am I getting there? Am I going to lie a few times and cheat a couple people, but in the end, everyone's going to benefit? Is that okay? And the answer ultimately is no, of course. But,
it never is.
Right.
And that's one of the things the adepts are looking for in potential chelas is, are they honest? Are they scrupulous? Are they ethical? And if the answer is no, then they can't use them. How can they trust them? How could they trust someone who uses devious means to get something that might be helpful to humanity? Devious is devious, and that's a person that you can never have complete confidence in. So that automatically disqualifies potential candidates.
It takes a much more astute observer to recognize that, because the end outcome appears to be good, but it takes a careful eye, a watchful eye. On the flip side, it's much easier to recognize someone who's putting on the facade of doing things in an upstanding, ethical way, but the end is completely selfish. That person is more easily recognizable than the first person we're talking about.
And the thing that comes up time and time again, almost always, the reason for the unethical behavior is ego.
Right.
Ego is anathema to the aspirant on the spiritual path.
To the person who truly believes in karma and knows it's real, nefarious means or selfish motives wouldn't even be a question. I mean, it wouldn't, because karma is real. Why would we do that to ourselves, really?
That's exactly right. Why would you harm someone else when that's a family member? We're brothers. If you wouldn't harm yourself, why would you tell somebody else an untruth, to make them believe that you have something special?
The illusion of separateness. In penning these accusations, did you stop to think that it is possible that which to you may appear a low motive is but the anxious search for the means which would be the salvation of a whole country, ever distrusted and suspected the protection by the conqueror of the conquered? You pride yourself upon not being a, quote, patriot. I do not, for in learning to love one's country, one but learns to love humanity the more. The lack of that which you term, quote, low motives, in 1857 caused my countrymen to be blown by yours from the mouths of their guns. Why then should I not fancy that a real philanthropist would regard the aspiration for a better understanding between the government and people of India as a most commendable instead of an ignoble one?
1857. So he kind of blazes through that and uses an unusual expression, blown from the mouths of their guns. If you don't know much about the history of India, you might go right past that and not pay much attention. But it was a major event. It was called the Sepoy Mutiny. Sepoy is a Hindu term that means a hired soldier. The East India Trading Company was founded somewhere in the early 1600s, and it was a business that was given an enormous number of rights to go to India, operate on behalf of the British government, and extract resources They had businesses, they had operations that would bring spices and tea and other fabrics, numerous things to India to be sold around the world. And they exploited India. There's no way around it. They made an enormous amount of money. And to protect themselves against any uprisings in India, they were given the authority to raise an army. They had approximately, at one point, 263,000 soldiers in India.
Wow.
250,000 soldiers to protect their monetary interests. And they were almost entirely locals, Muslims and Hindus, who were hired and paid to perform that function for them. Very few, only the officers basically were British, and the rest were local natives. So here's what happened. Both, well, let's see. In their weapons, they used cartridges to fire. And the lubricant that they used was, they suspected, lard made from both pig fat and cow fat. Well, the pig fat was against the Muslim religion, and the cow fat was against the Hindu religion. And so they rebelled against that. They said, you're demeaning our religions, and that's not right. So a group of them created an uprising. They were immediately arrested and put in prison, and then that antagonized the other local members of the militia. So they again rose up, and there was an enormous rebellion. 50,000 soldiers were killed, and approximately 100,000 citizens who were not soldiers. 150,000 people killed in this rebellion uprising. So it had an enormous impact. Obviously, the English people had the resources to put down the rebellion, and it was quelled. It lasted for about a year, but it created an enormous amount of resentment in India, and it was one more reason that they really hated the British. So he's saying here, if you do something positive, it will kind of help to atone for these sentiments. And this, we're talking about 25 years later, no, 35 years later, that have been simmering all these years. And it would make you guys heroes in the eyes of the local people. So that's what he's referring to here. And then Hume, on the other hand, is claiming that he just wants to appease them and act like he's actually doing something helpful for them. So that's where we stand.
That's the latter of the two selfish motive people, or the appearance of something positive and beneficial, but it's just a facade.
It actually isn't. Yeah, exactly.
Ignoble one. Quote, I don't care a fig, you say, for the knowledge and the philosophy on which it is based. If, quote, it would not be of any good to mankind, end quote. But when you are offered the means of doing such good, you turn away in scorn and taunt us with terms like a lure and a sham. The reward to which I shall look will be, you say, in earning my own self-approval.
All right, so Hume is saying, you're the one who is being facetious and dishonest. I'm the one who actually cares about these people.
He's speaking to a master of wisdom.
But he also says he doesn't care whether anybody else recognizes that. He only cares if he recognizes that himself.
My mentioning the subject of drafting a general plan for the organization of an Anglo-Indian branch related merely to the general plan and outward administration of the projected society, and not in the least to its esoteric studies, to the branch of the Universal Brotherhood, not to the School of Magic, and that's spelled with a K. Most assuredly, in such a matter as this one, the organization of an Anglo-Indian branch, meant to serve as a link between the British and the natives, must be prepared to grant at least some privileges hitherto refused to these natives. You English people are far more competent than we are to draft a general plan. You know the conditions you would be likely to accept or reject, as we might not. I asked for a skeleton plan, and you imagined I clamored for cooperation in the instructions to be given in spiritual sciences. Yet Mr. Sinnett seems to have understood my wish at a glance.
Here, once again, Hume has completely misunderstood. KH is saying, we recognize that you have tremendous organizational skills. That's very English. In fact, when everything runs according to schedule, the saying is English time. If Indian time would be just the opposite. Well, maybe we're going to have a meeting at 6 o'clock, and maybe at 6:45 people might show up and it might start. English it's like,
precise.
You say 6 o'clock, it's 6 o'clock, train time. So he is saying, you guys are much better than we are at organizing stuff, but we didn't ask you to arrange the curriculum. We didn't ask you to outline the syllabus. We just asked you to give us a general idea of how this would work, not what was going to be included in it. And he says, and by the way, you completely misunderstood it. Sinnett understood it completely.
Again, you seem to show an unfamiliarity with the Hindu mind when you say, quote, not 1 in 10,000 native minds is as well prepared to realize and assimilate transcendental truths as mine. Wow, that's bold, end quote. However much you may be right in thinking that, quote, amongst English men of science, there are not half a dozen, even whose minds are more capable of receiving these rudiments of occult knowledge than mine, you are mistaken as to the natives. The Hindu mind is preeminently open to the quick and clear perception of the most transcendental, the most abstruse metaphysical truths. Some of the most uneducated ones will seize at a glance that which would often escape the best Western metaphysician. Boom. You may be, and most assuredly are, our superiors in every branch of physical knowledge. In spiritual sciences, we were, are, and always will be your masters. Whoa! Wow!
And what do we see 140 years later? We see that the real wisdom in the world today comes from the East in the form of Tibetan Buddhism, Raja Yoga, etc., etc. The West, yes, in science, we're completely ahead of them in many ways. The Europeans, including Americans, are very brilliant using their minds. But when it comes to spiritual matters, you have to go back to the source. And the Asians, in general, have been doing it far longer than we have. We have to learn from them.
Isn't it interesting, though, that the native peoples of the Americas have similar spiritual traditions, but they didn't evolve into teachings per se.
They're not nearly as advanced
Right.
or as developed. That is true. All primitive indigenous people they're more in touch with nature. Mm-hmm. So you could say they are more spiritual in that sense, but as far as having vast amounts of of understanding that they don't have. They are more in tune with nature spirits and with the astral plane activity than anything higher than that. Even in Asia, you see that as well. In Thailand, for example, you see spirit houses.
Yes.
They look like bird houses.
All over the countryside and the mountains, yes.
And they will stop and say a little prayer to the whatever spirit is in charge of that little mini temple. So yeah, and these are everywhere. This idea of being in tune with nature and having a religious or spiritual connection with it. But it doesn't go anywhere near the realm of what the Mahatmas have.
But let me ask you, what can I, a half-civilized native, think of the charity, modesty, and kindness of one belonging to a superior race, one whom I know as a noble-minded, just, and kind-hearted man in most circumstances of his life, when, with all ill-disguised scorn, he exclaims, "If you want men to rush on blindfold, heedless of ulterior results, stick to your Alcotts. But if you want men of a higher class, whose brains are to work capably in your cause, remember, ... That is very rude, etc. My dear sir, we neither want men to rush on blindfold, nor are we prepared to abandon tried friends who would rather pass for fools than reveal what they may have learnt under a solemn pledge of never revealing it unless permitted, even for the chance of getting men of the very highest class." So he's mocking him now, isn't he? "Nor are we especially anxious to have anyone work for us except with entire spontaneity. We want true and unselfish hearts, fearless and confiding souls, and are quite willing to leave the men of the, quote, higher class and far higher intellects to grope their own way to the light." I love that. "Such will only look upon us as subordinates."
Remember the three main characteristics, the three main qualities: strong intellect, spotless purity, and dauntless courage. So that's what they're looking for. You can't stop with the strong intellect.
Hume has the first one, and then not really the other two.
No, exactly.
Because courage is masked by ego. He doesn't.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't want to look like he's less than.
No, there are millions of people in the world who probably have greater intellect than the chelas of the Mahatmas. Many of them are not even literate. Some of them don't know how to read and write, and yet they are trainable. But they are also intelligent, even if they don't know how to read and write.
Their purity and their courage are both off the charts.
Exactly.
And they're learnable and connected. Yeah.
Teachable. And if they don't have this love of humanity at heart, they're not going to get anywhere. That has to be number one.
I believe that these few quotations from your letter and the frank answers they have called forth are sufficient to show you how far we are from anything like an entente cordiale, a cordial understanding. You show a spirit of fierce combativeness and a desire to fight shadows evoked by your own imagination, allusion to Don Quixote. Oh, I don't need to read that, do I?
Yeah, no, but he throws in this description, which unless you know your literature, you would miss it. And he's talking about Don Quixote, who had lived in this imaginary world and was fighting the enemy, which was entirely in his mind.
Right. Did you recognize the quote?
Yeah.
You recognized it. But people who read Mahatma Letters wouldn't recognize that.
Well, not necessarily.
Oh.
I've read Don Quixote in the original Spanish, so I know the story, and and it's a well-known story.
A desire to fight shadows evoked by your own imagination. That's actually beautiful. You invite me to a conference only so that you may show me the defects and weaknesses in our modes of action and the causes for our supposed failure to convert humanity from their evil ways. Then why trouble yourself to write to me at all? Even that which you call a Parthian arrow was never meant as such.
So what is a Parthian arrow?
Something from Rome? Not sure.
Well, it's during Roman times. The Parthians were a group of Romans who were famous for their military skills.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But they were most famous for riding horses, and in a certain maneuver, when they were retreating, supposedly, could turn around on the horse and shoot with accuracy.
Oh, wow.
So we know it today as taking a parting shot.
A parting, oh, okay.
So it originally was a Parthian shot, but it's one of those egg corns. You'll have to look up egg corn on the internet. It's a word that got transposed because it sounds like what it actually means, but it's not quite accurate. So originally it was Parthian shot.
It does actually make sense, though.
Exactly.
You're parting. Yeah.
And so over time it became a parting shot. So he's telling Hume that you're accusing me of taking a parting shot when that wasn't the intent.
Wow, he's so is buck naked and butt naked of an egg corn.
That's an egg corn, exactly.
Which was the first? Which was the first?
Buck was first,
and then it devolved into what?
Yeah, that's a perfect egg corn.
Oh goodness! It is not I who will deprecate or undervalue the relative good. Your quote little birds have no doubt done much good in their way, and I certainly never dreamt of giving offense by my remark that the human race and its welfare were at least as noble a study, and the latter as desirable an occupation as ornithology. We are content to live as we do, unknown and undisturbed by a civilization which rests so exclusively upon intellect. Ooh. Nor do we feel in any way concerned about the revival of our ancient arts and high civilization. For these are as sure to come back in their time, and in a higher form, as the
Plesiosaurus. It was during the dinosaur age, mm-hmm. Yes. Plesiosaur were the sea creatures with the very long neck.
Okay. Oh, okay.
There were many different species of them. Some were as big as almost 50 feet long. Others were more like 9 feet long. And the number of vertebrae in their necks varied depending on the species. Supposedly as many as 78 vertebrae wow. in their neck alone.
Goodness.
So yeah, they're an amazing sea creature. And the other one is Megatherium, the giant ground sloth.
Okay. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, the sloths are one of the oldest animals still in existence today. We have two-toed sloths and three-toed sloths in Central America and in South America. And they're a very old animal.
We have the weakness to believe in ever-recurrent cycles and hope to quicken the resurrection of what is past and gone. We could not impede it, even if we would. The, quote, new civilization will be but the child of the old one, and we have only to let the eternal law take its own course to have our dead ones come out of their graves. Yet, we are certainly anxious to hasten the welcome event. Fear not, although we do, quote, cling superstitiously to the relics of the past, end quote, our knowledge will not pass away from the sight of man. It is the gift of the gods, and the most precious relic of all. Wow. The keepers of the sacred light did not safely cross so many ages, but to find themselves wrecked on the rocks of modern skepticism. Oh, poetry.
He's saying wow. here that everything occurs in cycles. They know what the cycles are in general terms. Everything old is new again. and this is a recurring theme in ancient wisdom teachings. Nothing gets reinvented. It has been used in other galaxies, in other planetary systems. It doesn't change. The general plan follows this pattern no matter what. So we know what the cycles are. We know in very big terms when they're going to happen, how they're going to happen. We don't know all the details because that depends on what humans do and other forces that we have no control over. But they absolutely know the general plan of what is going to occur.
It's interesting that he mentions these two extinct animals. He's implying that they will come back in their own due time.
And I find that kind of hard to believe, but
it could be just a grand cycle of life re-evolving on the planet. If, during the Kali Yuga, if everyone does physically go away from the surface of the earth, perhaps the Darwin's plan starts fresh in some way.
And maybe he's referring to a new cycle on another planet at some point. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but it does seem a little strange.
Or the souls, or the group souls from the animals are reincarnating in the future. Mm-hmm. We will always find volunteers to replace the tired sentries, and the world, bad as it is in its present state of transitory period, can yet furnish us with a few men now and then. You, quote, do not propose moving further in the matter, quote, end quote, unless we make some further sign. Did you want to say something?
Go ahead and finish that.
My dear sir, we have done our duty. We have responded to your appeal, and now propose to take no further step. We who have...
So here, he says, even if this thing doesn't work out, don't fret about it. We will always have replacements. Remember, in a previous letter, he said, right now, our numbers are diminishing. They're going down. But he said, don't worry, we're not worried. We will always find replacements to take our place in the plan that is going to unfold no matter what.
It's again a cycle. Everything's a cycle.
And then he said, and you're telling us that if we don't meet your expectations and change our proposal, then you're done. He said, don't worry, we're done too.
We who have studied a little Kant's moral teachings and analyzed them somewhat carefully have come to the conclusion that even this great thinker's views on that form of duty, das Sollen, which defines the methods of moral action, falls short of a full definition of an unconditional absolute principle of morality as we understand it. And this Kantian note sounds throughout your letter. You so love mankind, you say, that were not your generation to benefit by it, you would reject knowledge itself. And yet, this philanthropic feeling does not even seem to inspire you with charity towards those you regard as of an inferior intelligence. Why? Simply because the philanthropy you Western thinkers boast of, having no character of universality, is unable to warm all mankind with its beneficent rays. This, I think, is the secret of the spiritual failure and unconscious egotism of this age. And you, otherwise a good and wise man, are unable to understand our ideas upon the society as a universal brotherhood, and hence you turn your face away from it.
Immanuel Kant is a German philosopher. Philosophers are very interesting because what does a philosopher do? You know, an electrical engineer can build stuff and come up with solutions to a problem. But what the heck does a philosopher do? Sit and think all day?
Ask questions about life and try to find some answers for it.
So we basically have science, religion, and philosophy are the three main avenues for which people can search for the meaning of life. What is life all about? And 500 years ago, all of them were included in one, religion. We make the science, we make the philosophy, we control everything. And it was only in the last, well, since the Age of Enlightenment was when they became kind of started to separate. Mm-hmm. And then we have three different fields that have the same purpose, but science doesn't recognize religion. Mm-hmm. And philosophy is kind of an overall term. It's interesting because there are some really good philosophers. And Immanuel Kant, who lived, 1724 to 1804, so he had died already 75 years previous. Mm-hmm. He was known for having a philosophy that included a sense of duty, what we would call today dharma, that whatever your life goal is, it has to have a sense of a mission, something to accomplish that is beneficial to mankind. So there's a reason why he mentions Kant. Das Sollen was the name of a book he wrote, and Sollen in German is a word that's hard to translate. So dharma is probably as close as you can get to it. But duty, he uses the term duty, is one way that you could translate it. Mm-hmm.
However suspicious you might ever feel about the details of the brooch, there is one prime feature in that case which your astuteness has already told you can only be accounted for on the theory of a stronger will influencing Mrs. Hume to think after that particular object and no other. And if Madame Blavatsky, a sickly woman, must be credited with such powers, are you quite sure that you yourself would not also be made to succumb to a trained will 10 times stronger than hers?
Now this is important to pay attention to. Read the next.
I could come to you tomorrow and, installing myself in your house, get an entire domination over your whole mind and body in 24 hours, and you would never be aware of it for one moment. I may be a good man, but for all you know, I may as easily be a wicked, plotting schemer, hating profoundly your white race which subjugated and daily humiliates mine, and take revenge on you, one of the best representatives of that race. Oh my gosh. If the power of exoteric mesmerism alone were employed, a power acquired with equal ease by the bad as by the good man, even then you could hardly escape the snares laid out for you. Were the man you invited but a good mesmerizer, for you are a remarkably easy subject from the physical standpoint. Quote, but my conscience, my intuition, you may argue, poor help in such a case as mine. Your intuition would make you feel but that which really was, for the time being, and as to your conscience, you then accept Kant's definition of it? You, perhaps, believe with him that under all circumstances, and even with the full absence of definite religious notions, and occasionally even with no firm notions about right and wrong at all, man has ever a sure guide in his own inner moral perceptions or conscience.
So let's take a look at that. First of all, he says, if you gave me permission, I could move into your house, and within 24 hours, I would completely be able to control your mind. Now, obviously, he would no longer be an adept if he did that, because that would go completely against all rules of the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. They cannot ever use their powers to force someone to do something. And that's, again, why they test their chelas mercilessly, to see what their motives are. The chela has to prove not only to the adept, but to themselves that they have the moral capability and the ethics required to be a chela. You have to prove to yourself, there's nothing that will force me to deviate from that which is proper and that which is true and that which is honest. And if you don't have that, they're not going to work with you. But someone who was unscrupulous, who managed somehow to develop some of these cities, would be able to do that. And that's why they guard these secrets so carefully. And then he says, you would say, oh, there's no way you could do that. He says, you might be surprised. And then he says, then you accept Kant's definition of conscience, meaning that conscience tells you what not to do, but it never tells you what you should be doing. That's an interesting concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody says, well, it's on my conscience. My conscience tells me not to do this, that I shouldn't be doing this. But it never says, you know what you should do is set up a foundation to help humanity or something. Your conscience doesn't tell you that.
Yeah, interesting. That's something different. That's the intuition. That's something deeper.
Yeah. All right.
Interesting. The greatest of mistakes. With all the formidable importance of this moral factor, it has one radical defect. Conscience, as it was already remarked, may be well compared to that demon whose dictates were so zealously listened to and so promptly obeyed by Socrates. Like that demon, conscience may tell us what we must not do, yet it never guides us as to what we ought to perform, nor gives any definite object to our activity. And nothing can be more easily lulled to sleep and even completely paralyzed as this same conscience by a trained will stronger than that of its possessor. Your conscience will never show you whether the mesmerizer is a true adept or a very clever juggler if he once has passed your threshold and got control of the aura surrounding your person. Wow.
Remember, juggler means trickster.
Right. You speak of abstaining from any but an innocent work like bird collecting, lest there be danger of creating another Frankenstein's monster. Imagination as well as will creates. That's a teaching right there. Suspicion is the most powerful, provocative agent of imagination. Wow. Beware. You have already begotten in you the germ of a future hideous monster, and instead of the realization of your purest and highest ideals, you may one day evoke a phantom which, barring every passage of light, will leave you in worse darkness than before and will harass you to the end of your days.
Imagination as well as will creates.
That's a teaching. That's a profound...
It's Kriya Yoga, Kriya Shakti, the power of creation.
Creating in the mind.
And artists do it all the time, whether you're a sculptor or a painter or whatever.
Yes.
You create the image in your mind, you create the final object as a thought form, and then you make it happen. Sculptors sometimes claim that they see the image within the stone and all they have to do is chip away. Isn't that exactly the same thing that Raja Yoga is? The pure, evolved individual is there the whole time. All you have to do is remove all the dross, all of the excess that is preventing that ogoides from shining. The ogoides is a term for the inner self, and it comes from golden, the shining golden self that is purity itself, the pure individual.
I've never heard you describe it like that. That's brilliant. It's such a good way to, and that's the teaching of the koshas, or the constitution of man, The ogoides is the atma, or pure spirit, inside all of us, and then we're sheathed or covered by varying degrees of densities of bodies. And that's, if you can see the sculpture inside, that's our true spirit. That's really brilliant the way you described that.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have to come down. We have to be, remember, cribbed, cabined, and confined in order for our spiritual self to achieve any meaning.
It's like the process of chipping away at the stone block to reveal the sculpture inside. That's our learning, that we are chipping ourselves away.
Yes.
We're chipping, getting the dross. That's our path of life.
This is the self-transformation process.
That's so cool. I've never heard that analogy. That's good.
All right.
There's one more sentence in letter 11. Again, expressing the hope that my candor may not give offense, I am, dear sir, as ever, your most obedient servant, Kuthumi Lal Singh.
All right. So A.O. Hume has been put on notice here. And Sinnett obviously knows about it ahead of time.
I can't wait to see Hume's response.
We never,
or at least
except in that one instance,
reacts.
we don't have any of his letters that I can remember. But we know by what K.H. answers approximately what he has said. And he quotes extensively from Hume's letters when he replies to them. So that's helpful.
We don't have any knowledge of how he reacted to this letter?
Not specifically, no.
But he did keep communications up, so he obviously wasn't offended to the point where he just said, well, forget you guys.
Yeah, the whole relationship was very tenuous at this point. It could have gone either direction. It kind of came to a very strained entente, a strained understanding of, okay, well, let's just see if we can make this happen. And each side was a little bit wary of the other, but they did work with him, and he did write some very good articles. And we'll get a lot of good information that came because of his questions and his input and output in the form of writings. So he did have a very positive contribution, at least for a period of time.
That was letter 11.
All right, I think that wraps it up for today.
It does.
And we'll continue with 12 and 13 in our next exciting episode. And these really are exciting. I don't know of any movie that has a plot quite as exciting as what we have here. And it gets even more exciting as we go along. It's some of the events that have already happened that we've seen and will happen in the future as we continue are going to sometimes keep us on the edge of our seat to see what the resolution is going to be. The dénouement, as they say in French, the untying, the unraveling of the plot.
Cliffhangers.
We'll have a couple of cliffhangers as you will see as we go along.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching.
See you in session 9.